BWI is live. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. It's post-draft day, Draft Monday. Everyone's getting a grade. You passed, you failed. Maybe you didn't do either, and maybe you were a player in the draft. You have a new home. We're going to discuss all that stuff here on the BWI live show. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. We'll also be talking about new athletic director Patrick Kraft. Dave Eckert and myself, we did a BWI Daily after his press conference on Friday, getting a little bit of a deeper dive now here on Monday to give you our thoughts about the situation, what he said, and the overall tone. But we'll be starting with the NFL draft and starting with my first-round draft picks, but all of us here are still undrafted. Senior editor Nate Bauer back from a weekend away at a wedding. Nate, how are you feeling? Rested and recovered, right?
I need a day of vacation to recover from the vacation. So we'll get through it. We'll power through, D. Frank.
Also joining us today is David Eckert, our expert reporter. He'll be giving us more big man update from Penn State basketball at the end of the show, so that is worth staying here for. And Dave, how you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, T. Frank. I am thoroughly energized from 3 days of NFL draft watching.
By the way, Dave, I don't know if you have a big man update, but you're giving one at the end of the show, so you have plenty of time.
Yeah, sure. I'll grab one right now. No.
So, as always, if you're watching the show here, please give it a like and subscribe to Blue-White Illustrated on YouTube so that you never miss the BWI live show here on Monday at noon. And if you're watching and you share the video, you like the video, it helps us to, let people know this show doesn't suck and that we're having a good time here on Monday. We'll be talking about all those things, but the first thing I want to do is I want to get to your initial thoughts about the draft. Dave, I'm going to start with you, covering the draft all weekend long. Let's start at the top. Jahan Dotson to the Washington Commanders. Like it? Don't like it? What do you think?
There are better places, I think, for Jahan Dotson, but it's not maybe more functional ones with a good quarterback. But it's fine, right? It could be worse. They have a need, right? Outside of Terry McLaurin, there's really not much there. So you'd expect Jahan Dotson to go in and be the number 2 guy pretty much right away. And look, I mean, you can do worse than Carson Wentz. So I think he'll be okay. Obviously, it's not the Chiefs or the Bills, who I think we were kind of looking at a little bit further down the line in the draft, where we expected Jahan Dotson to go. But certainly there's opportunity there for him for sure.
Yeah, and that is an interesting situation. I'm going to discuss kind of how all that stuff works on the BWI Daily Show with Greg Pickle. We're breaking down the draft from kind of the nuts and bolts here and there, thoughts when it comes to players and situations. But Nate, I gotta ask you, did I adequately explain who A.J. Brown is on Thursday night last week?
To my understanding and the level that I needed to know, yeah,
okay,
sure.
Good.
A good football player. I feel like I should have said this from the top, but my opening statement about needing a vacation probably came across as deeply offensive to Dave. And you and Greg, all of whom spent the entirety of the weekend slaving over a computer following the draft. So many hat tips and thanks to the rest of the BWI staff for slogging through. I mean, 8 picks. That's a busy weekend for you guys.
So much Mel Kiper, Nate. Much Mel Kiper.
Honestly, I may have just resigned, right? Like, you don't want to watch that. It's intolerable. In any case, I digress.
I saved a lot of my takes, a lot of my thoughts for today because it was like Saturday night, Sunday. We'll do it on the live show. So here you're going to get all of my thoughts and analysis, especially on the day 3 guys on the show, where we're going to flip this around and you guys are going to ask me questions about players that went to certain positions, including undrafted free agents and stuff like that. And if you want to, we can start that now. Where do you want to talk? What do you want to talk about when it comes to the draft? Guys, what do you want to do when it comes to players, positions, top to bottom? What do you want to talk about?
I want to know the biggest T. Frank surprise related to the Penn State guys? What surprised you the most? Was it Dotson at the top, or was it some of the guys at the bottom?
So I would say I was mildly surprised, and not surprised, but like if you have an either or situation and you don't quite know how it's going to go, I said starting round for Rasheed Walker is 5, like middle of 5, but he could go anywhere from 5 to undrafted. So going in the 7th round, he's got great traits. I thought that was a little bit of a surprise, but not really. The biggest surprise was Dotson going 16th overall. And I just, that situation, and I know that this may not be, this is an easy way to get dunked on later, but is Jahan Dotson a first-round pick? From a production standpoint, from a skill standpoint, I love his tape. I love everything about Jahan Dotson. But in the NFL, typically, height, weight, speed matter almost as much. So the fact that he went in the NFL draft, not just in the first round, but the top half of the round, where you normally see guys that have production and traits, and whether or not it's the 4.38 speed or it's the 6'4" or whatever their trait is at the position, that's usually where those guys go. Trayvon Walker went number 1 overall because he is bigger and faster and stronger than the other guys, even though he's had no production. And that's kind of the reason I'm surprised. Jahan Dotson is a great football player, but I questioned physically if he was a first-round pick, and that was kind of my discussion leading up to the draft. And the Washington football team emphatically answered that there was a run on receivers, and they had a first-round grade on him, so they took him.
Please respect the Washington Commanders, T. Frank.
Oh,
you just called them the football team.
Yes.
What are we doing here?
Well, so I had to try so hard to scrub their previous name from my mind so that I never used their previous nickname, but I had to insert football team so forcefully that I have yet to come around to Commanders, just like they're still the San Diego Chargers in the recesses of my brain. So it happened. But yes.
Was Dotson, because I'm actually just curious about this, like, did you see Dotson as a product of, like, the fact that he was the 5th receiver, I think, taken off 5 receivers in the first 16 picks.
Yeah.
Like, what is the, and the quarterback thing, I didn't quite follow that. I mean, no quarterbacks taken early, right? Like, what did you attribute that to?
So this is some of the stuff we're going to get into on the BWI Daily, so I'll give you just a little bit of a nugget of when you don't have quarterbacks, this is what happens. Another player suffered the opposite of this for Penn State previously, who was an elite football player, but there were more quarterbacks. So the framework of a draft can kind of decide where players go. And I do think that run on receivers was a huge part of this, because a team like Washington clearly needs another guy. Diami Brown, they've got a deep stable of receivers, including their running backs. Antonio Gibson was a receiver at Memphis. J.D. McKissick is a receiving back. So they've got a lot of guys that are pass catchers, but they don't have a guy like Dotson. So from a fit standpoint, it's a good fit that he can play in the slot. He can play on the outside if he's the number 2, and Diami Brown is like the number 3. Diami Brown is a vertical deep threat guy. That's his major thing. Dotson can do all of those things, but I don't know that he's going to excel on the perimeter. But he can do both. So it's a good fit from that perspective. But yeah, Carson Wentz and everything Dave said, that's the hang-up, is it's a terrible organization from a leadership standpoint, from a not being sued standpoint, from a ethical standpoint. Ron Rivera can only do so much as a head coach. And it's an okay offense. So, those are the things working against Jahan Dotson, is he went to the Commanders. Happy Monday to Nick. If you want to get your questions on the air, drop them in the chat. We'll be discussing the draft. If this were, a Monday night show, I'd say pull up a beer. We'll discuss the draft. But, that's what we're going to be doing today. And Glenn, we are going to be getting to this question in just a little bit. So stay tuned for that. But I want to go through kind of the guys that went, and then we'll get into the impact for Penn State and what is going on with why this happened in a little bit. So what else you got for me?
T. Frank, why, you and I I think it was Thursday on the Daily, talked a lot about some of like that third tier of prospect, right? Your Rasheed Walker, your Tariq Castro-Fields, your Jesse Luquetas. Why do you think that, instead of where they were projected, which was kind of like the fourth, fifth, sixth range, they all went in the sixth and seventh round? What did you see from them or from the circumstances of the draft that caused that?
So an interesting aspect of this draft, and this is something with the Baltimore Ravens selecting Jordan Stout in the fourth round, is that this was a deep draft because of COVID. So, Nate, you've talked about this, and this is going to be something that bleeds into the conversation previously, but Penn State really had like 2 drafts worth of players going in this draft. But everybody did. So the Ravens specifically loaded up on third and fourth round picks because they knew maybe the top end of this draft wasn't as good because the guys that were good went last year. Like if you could go, you went last year, didn't matter. Opted out, whatever. This year was the year for the guys that needed to prove something, the Jaquan Briskers of the world that can come back and improve their draft stock. So there would be older players, there would be more players, and it would be a situation where you could get a lot of value in the middle of the draft. So I think that's what it was. It's just players that had similar value but better production or that tested. Rasheed Walker didn't do any testing. So if Rasheed Walker had run a sub 540 and he had jumped 31 inches and all these things that we think he might be able to do, then you would have a different conversation about Walker. Because he was injured and he could not participate, I think that's really the reason that dropped him from 5 to 7. And then, other guys, it's just questions about their profile and their upside. Tariq Castro-Fields, is he going to be able to get you the football? And Jesse Luqueta, what position is he? Why was he not as athletic as he seemed on film? Twitchy, great movement skills, but in the end, when he ran and he tested, he's a defensive end that has no tangible upside from a physical standpoint and no production on film. So if you want to get a guy that you're betting just had a bad testing offseason, and there's some things that he can do from a versatility, intelligence, run defense standpoint, I think that's valuable when you combine that with his length and his size. So that's really what those 3 guys, what they look like to me.
Can I just say, and this isn't about me necessarily, but the Jordan Stout pick really lends some credence as to just how much Penn State football is going to miss him this season. T-Frank, I know you don't want to address it. You don't want to get into it, but I'm just saying, I mean, a 4th round pick for a punter.
That's better than Blake Gillikin, who was, the savior at the position after several seasons of having dreadful field position situations. Penn State's had a good punter for 5 or 6 years now, and this is going to be a major storyline next season. But I will use your line against you, Nate, is if you score points, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's true.
Not to be a homer here, but the Bills didn't punt against the Patriots in the playoffs. So the fact that they got Matt Ariza is like, okay, if we need to punt, we want to have the biggest leg that's come out in the last 15 years. But yeah, Jordan Stout is excellent. He's an excellent punter that combines strength and, kicking strength with accuracy, the ability to pin guys in the 20. I was reading some PFF metrics on him, and he was far and away the most efficient punter when you look at net average, ability to pin guys in the 20, starting field position, all that stuff. So yeah, he went in the 4th round. I still wouldn't take a punter in the 4th round, personally, but the value for him was there for the Ravens, who had so many picks that they could spend a 4th round on a punter. They're a good team. They can do things like that.
Yeah, you're not John Harbaugh. You don't get to make that decision, pal.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You're right. And I wouldn't take a kicker before the last round of my fantasy draft either. So, I just hate special teams.
Can we just
go ahead,
Sorry,
Nate,
go ahead, Dave.
I was going to make a stupid fantasy football comment about just getting rid of kickers because they're stupid. But anyway,
Listen, we have to address these comments. The
sure,
the questions about, right? All
right, let's get to this.
So what, so 8 draft picks. Why didn't Penn State play better? Why didn't they win more games when you have that many draft selections? The majority of the players selected outside of obviously the best one don't help you score points. And the one who does help you score points, can't do it by himself. So like, I don't know how to better say Penn State's offense has not been good for 2 years. And because of that, they have not it is disingenuous to not acknowledge that Penn State has been competitive, right? Outside of at Nebraska in 2020, Penn State has been competitive basically throughout, right? Like even losing the games that they've lost, not having the success that they've missed out on. Penn State has stayed in games, has been in games, but they just have this fatal flaw of not being able to score points. And I don't think that the majority of the players who were drafted in this draft, they reflect that, right? Like the fact that Penn State didn't have more play, like a running back, a tight end in this draft, and specifically a quarterback. Like, what are we talking about here? The fact that those weren't the guys who were drafted tells you very strongly that, yeah, this is a program and this is a team for the last couple of years that was positioned to be competitive, but to not get over the top because they just couldn't score points.
Dave, I want to come to you for a quick question and really just kind of answer the same.
T. Frank, your audio feed cut out. I didn't hear what you asked me. I'm sorry.
So I want to come to you about this one because is it a good thing or a bad thing that despite everything that Nate said, that they're still putting players in the NFL? So is this a down situation or is this a sign of a fundamental problem for the Nittany Lions?
Look, I mean, I think it's a good thing that they're getting guys in the NFL, right? That's never a bad thing. You have to kind of separate it because we didn't learn anything that we didn't already know from Penn State having 8 guys drafted this weekend. We just didn't, because we already knew that Penn State was a team that was underperforming, its talent levels, right? Like, I don't think that's breaking news to everyone. Everybody knows that Penn State should have probably been better than 7-6 last year, So yeah, it's just they're separate things, right? If you're a Penn State fan and you're invested in Penn State having the best talent on its team, then you want Penn Staters to get drafted. So to me, they're kind of, separate things.
So there's a lot going on right now, including some technical issues. So we're going to be this is going to be ugly for a second while I get all this set up. There we go. Sorry about that, everybody. Collect myself here for a second. Is this going to get better, Nate? Is this going to get better? Because, Penn State still has talented players on the roster, but this leads us back to our conversation every time we talk about the offense needing to score points and Penn State. Is it going to get better?
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's a question of how slow of a burn is it going to be, right? When you have the instability, look, and I could be wrong about this. We play hypothetical all the time here, right?
Yeah.
So let's play hypothetical. What if Ricky Rane was the offensive coordinator in 2020? What happens, right?
Yeah.
You've got a quarterback who had started before, took a team to a New Year's Six game, had a lot of success. Ricky gets crushed sometimes, but that offense put up points very consistently. There were some notable, blips on the radar where they didn't get it done, but that was a team and that was an offense that put up some points. So let's say that Ricky Rane is back in 2020 instead of Kirk Shiraka. Let's say that doesn't, even if Ricky leaves, let's say you go from Ricky straight to Yursich, like COVID, obviously. I mean, there's so much that has to be played out for Penn State that my question now is, because legitimately, I have no idea what to expect from Mike Yursich's offense this season.
Yeah.
I thought it was objectively not very good last year. Not to the level that it needs to be, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
52 programs scored 30 or more points last season in college football. Like, getting to 30 should not be that big of a challenge for a program of Penn State football stature. And so understanding Sean Clifford's injury, understanding the issues that they had on the offensive line, understanding maybe some of the shortcomings that existed in the running backs room, like you name it. Noah Cain coming off of an injury, not having Journey Brown, what have you. Are those things that didn't exist last season corrected to the point now where they can get above that threshold? And really, let's be honest, like, you got to be better than that. You got to be better than 30. You got to be 35. You got to be 38.
There's always more than one way to skin a cat, and I wish I could have come up with a better idiom than that. But you know what I'm saying.
Poor cats.
You can be Georgia and have one of the most dominant teams, defenses in modern college football history. You can do that. You need to have 15 players drafted in the NFL. And Nate, one thing that you and I talked about, during Thursday night of the draft, is somebody mentioned to you Penn State needs to put more guys in the NFL because look at Chris Olave and look at Garrett Wilson. And your counterpoint was what?
That Penn State has put a ton of, like, whether they got drafted that high or not is fine. That's a different debate. But Chris Godwin and Allen Robinson and KJ Hamler are some of what I would describe as like the guys in the NFL, right? Like that position has come through for Penn State historically in a very good place. It's just that they haven't had multiples of that. But I don't even know if that's necessary. Like, I think it.
Oh yes, it is.
Shields the point.
But
that's not why Ohio State won last year. Like, yeah, having those receivers, having elite receivers and multiples of them helps you. Absolutely. No doubt about it. But CJ Stroud is why they won.
Sure. Ultimately, yes, the quarterback. But it makes it easier on the quarterback when you have, and this is the real thing to me, is speed. It's not just that the best teams right now, what they're doing is they have multiple threats that you cannot account for because of their speed. Alabama has gone all in on track athletes at receiver. Devontae Smith, Jamison. They had Devontae Smith, who was one of the fastest receivers in the NFL, won the Heisman. Behind him was Jamison Williams, who people are comparing to Tyreek Hill as far as different level of speed. You have Garrett Wilson, who is the slow guy and runs a 4.39 between him and Chris Olave. And the best receiver is Jackson Smith-Njigba. Like, you cannot solve all these problems when you have so much speed on the field at receiver. And then when you have the next level things like tackle breaking, route running, all that stuff, it creates stress points that the RPO and speed, what it does, it is so hard to fix unless you can just punch somebody in the mouth if you're Georgia, which again is equally hard to do. There are more fast guys than there are massive fast guys.
I'm gonna argue against myself here, but even Georgia winning the national championship, they put up 33 points. Now, one of those was pick six, right?
Yep.
So defense did win that game, but you look through Georgia's season, other than the Clemson game, right, which was just this bizarre, weird game to open the season. They were putting up, like, they didn't come up short of 30 points in any of their other games.
Yeah.
Like even defense wins championships. Georgia won a championship because their offense put up a ton of points. Like, that's just, it's what it takes.
Yeah. Finding, and that's what I mean by there's more than one way to do this, but there's only been one Georgia to run the ball, short fields, explosive run game versus Oklahoma, Clemson, Georgia.
Alabama scores points.
Yeah.
Alabama beat Georgia with 41 points.
But this is my point, is those teams use speed and space. The majority of the teams getting the college football playoff use speed and space. Two of them were Michigan and Georgia. So it takes a very special situation from an averages standpoint to get there. So that's I guess my point is the law of averages still remains that Penn State trying to build and win the way they are, they need to get this season, Mitchell Tinsley and Parker Washington have to be explosive deep threats and catch the ball at any part of the field. Malik Mega or Keandre Lambert-Smith, one of those guys has to complement. Like, you need to have threats. The threat indication has to be everywhere. So Jahan Dotson is great, and that is exactly what you need, is continually to have that guy. But to be next level good, Penn State had Mike Gesicki, and they had Chris Godwin and Saquon Barkley, like multiple threats so you can't be shut down. And that's what I think really, when it comes to where they've stagnated a little bit, is make that consistent flow of talent there. Plus, the quarterback, we'll see. We'll see what happens this senior year with all of those threats, because he did not have those consistent threats the last 2 years. So where are we going next?
Yeah, we solved it. That's it. I mean, that's the end of the conversation.
I think it feels logical at this point to point out that Ron Rivera, who is the head coach of the Washington Commanders, basically said Sean Clifford's bad, and that's why that's why they feel justified in picking Jahan Dotson. So he's on team Drew Alar immediately, Christian Bayou right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know.
He's the guy that played Taylor Heineke too, so I don't know.
What was the context of that, Dave? I didn't see that.
Let me find it. I gotta re-find it. I was poking around on their SB Nation blog, and I found a line where they basically just said, "Yeah, in not as many words."
While you're doing that, I'll give you some context on some other guys that I found, so we can do kind of a quote roundup here. Brian Gutekunst, the Packers GM, talking about Rasheed Walker, said his value was too good to pass up in the 7th round. He was the 3rd guy they took on the offensive line, including a 3rd and a 4th round pick. So that's a situation where he's got to perform. But there's opportunity there because they want somebody at right tackle that isn't Elton Jenkins, who was at one point their starting center, but has played every position for them along the offensive line. So they're looking for somebody to play on the right side. There's an opportunity there, but it's an uphill climb for him. Brandon Smith is the guy I want to talk about a little bit later, a little more in-depth, because I think his situation is super interesting. But Matt Rule said Brandon Smith is a guy we targeted for a long time. He's young. He came out early. You see the physical traits. That's all they mentioned about Brandon Smith. Physical traits, freak athlete, freak athlete, freak athlete, freak athlete. And then for Jesse Luketa, didn't run the fastest time. This is from Steve Keim, the general manager. Didn't run the fastest time, physical and disruptive, plays inside, outside linebacker, and he plays with passion. So they're still playing off the idea that he might be an inside linebacker on rundowns. I hope not. But they seem intent on playing him at the outside linebacker position for the most part. So hopefully that's the case. Did I give you some time there, Dave? Well, we did, but now we don't have audio.
Sorry, I was on a different tab here. So quarterbacks often make receivers better, but at Penn State, Ron Rivera believes Jahan Dotson made their quarterback better by making some of the acrobatic catches that he did. So, okay, I'm going to walk that back a little bit. He didn't say that he's bad. I'm sorry. Let me look again, because that's not what I was looking for originally.
I mean, I do think that that's a fair point, though, right? Like there were completions that went to Sean Clifford that probably would not have happened had they been directed to a different receiver. I don't know. I was super impressed with Jahan Dotson, particularly this past season. I thought he caught everything in the area, which was reflected by Washington picking him that high.
Kyle asked, would KJ Hamler had stats like Dotson? Kyle, can you elaborate a little bit? I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, but just, are you saying like if he was in the current offense or if they were together? Because I think that's kind of what I'm talking about, is if you have full-fledged Jahan Dotson playing the way he does and KJ Hamler, now we're in a situation where what do you do? Because it took Dotson a little bit of time to develop to be that guy. And Penn State's always had a lead receiver. In these other places, they all have a lead guy, whether it's Jalen Waddle until he gets hurt at Alabama and then Devontae Smith takes over. But the guy who's getting less opportunities averages 17.5 yards a catch. Like they're deep threat, touchdown, explosive play monster, and then they become the guy in the offense later. So, I think that there's some of that opportunity, even if you have more than one guy and you're not force-feeding every target to Jahan Dotson. And that's what I want to see this coming season from Penn State. Let's let's move on. Dave, did you find what you were looking for?
I did not. I've been bamboozled by the internet. I apologize.
You read the internet wrong? That happens to me all the time.
Wrong.
So, Nate, I'm just going to say this. Like, everything we heard about Pat Kraft from Pat Kraft on Friday, you had said some version of this leading into his press conference. So first off, pat yourself on the back for being good at your job, and then elaborate. Now that you have heard what he said, is there additional context you took from it that you were interested in?
Yeah. I think the thing that comes across to me and what came across it, now, obviously, I'm like, if you joined us late, I was not there on Friday. I was out traveling. And so I was able to see the press conference via the Blue-White Illustrated YouTube channel in its entirety. And, the thing that I thought came across the most, and that has been reflected in the time since with some of the people that I've talked to, is like, this dude wants to win. He is determined to do that. Right. And so that might seem like an obvious, of course, every athletic director wants to win. But my sense is that there is a dedication behind it to do some of the things that, might be messy, right? Or that might not be easy to get through the slog, to set up programs to have the opportunity, to have every opportunity to succeed and to win.
Yeah.
And so if that happens, right, like this is kind of a difficult way to put it, but when we talk about, right, like Penn State players and college football athletes making the most of their opportunity, right? Like, your academic experience at Penn State can be whatever you want it to be. It can be not easy necessarily, but it can be manageable.
Yeah.
But it can also be very, very difficult, and you can challenge yourself. But there is no shortage, or there shouldn't be any shortage of resources to your ability to succeed and to absolutely make the most of the opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there is probably an argument to be made that has not always been the case in its entirety, right? In the fullest extent of that concept for specific programs at Penn State within the athletic department.
Right.
And so if Pat Kraft's
this sounds like great news, especially for basketball. Like, I understand football is going to take center stage when it comes to the high end investment, but it sounds like there's more backbone to the rest of everything, whether it's the hockey program or basketball or money making programs that have been kind of like, this is our place.
Right. Yeah. And so, I don't want to belabor the point, but there are two sides to this story, right? The first side is, hey, some of the excuses, some of the things that have been legitimate hurdles to finding the type of success that some of these programs would like to achieve are in the process, or could be in the process of being removed by Pat Kraft, right? Like unlocking some of the challenges of working with admissions. We've talked about this before, right? Like, it's a big deal. Things that are university policy that do not affect the overall standing of the university, to make changes and have an evolution that will help unlock some opportunities to bring people into these different programs. That's football, that's basketball. It's all over the place, right? If those things are accomplished, the one side is, yes, you now have the opportunity. There will not be things that inhibit you from having success on the structural level. The other side to it is, if that's the circumstance and you are provided all of those resources and all of those opportunities, and then you don't succeed, there are going to be repercussions for that, right? Like that, it will not be okay. Feathers will be ruffled, put it that way, because sitting on your laurels is not the MO of Pat Kraft, as I understand it.
Dave, one of the things that I think surprised me when it came to, and I don't remember if we covered this in depth when we talked about it afterwards on Friday. But the forward commitment to 31 different programs in the light that Nate just painted, is that a surprise to you, given the current landscape of college football and college basketball and how they are racing away from the rest of college athletics and Penn State's, just the challenges of running such a large program? Is that lip service, do you think, or is that a real commitment to all of the athletic programs at Penn State?
Yeah, I thought it was notable that I think that original point came from Neely Bendapudi, who is going to be Penn State's new president.
Yep.
So, that's one aspect to it. But, I don't want to call it lip service just because I don't know. But I do think that if you are going to, make some decisions there, that it probably doesn't make sense to say during your opening press conference, oh, by the way, we're cutting 5 sports. Please be terrified for the remaining 2 months before I get here. And I don't think that's something, despite what Penn State diehard football fans want. I'm not sure that's something that would be received well universally by the Penn State athletics massive.
Yeah.
So, I don't really know what to make of that right now, is basically what I'm saying, because as Nate kind of alluded to, he's committed to doing what it takes for the top level programs at the university.
Yeah.
So to what extent that means, I'm not sure, but I'm not really reading too much into that right now.
Kind of a wait and see if that comes to fruition when it comes to athletics. And Nate, we can have an entirely different show on the future of, every sport at the college level being varsity, which I know we've talked about previously. We're going to move on beyond that. And Dave, I just want to get back to you quickly. After the weekend and kind of digging into this stuff, I've brought up a couple of topics, but is there anything that stood out to you about either what Pat Kraft said or something you're curious about moving forward now that you've had the weekend to digest it from being there to now?
Well, the one thing that we really talked about to you, Frank, in our stand-up afterwards was his take on NIL and specifically teams kind of tampering, or I guess schools more accurately kind of tampering with athletes who aren't in the transfer portal yet. And I just wanted to bring this up because Cale Sanderson, Penn State's wrestling coach, had this tweet this morning. Simple and effective plan. The NCAA should offer a $25,000 reward to its student athletes for information that leads to a tampering violation. So a little bit of a solution there thrown out by Cale, potentially after hearing those comments. But I still think that's the major thing. It was what he said about NIL and the transfer portal. He's clearly not super content with how it looks right now. So I'll be interested to see what action he takes. I just thought that Cale Sanderson tweet was funny.
That's an informant network. I like the idea. You don't know which one is going to get you, but there's a bounty. It's a bounty system. That's phenomenal. So Nate, one thing that came up, and I want to address this because this has tentacles that run very deep, and I think it's a bigger deal inside the Penn State fan base than it is maybe this conversation nationally. And it goes back to the Joe Paterno documentary, 10 years since everything that went down. Patrick Kraft was not shy about talking about Joe Paterno. Is that intentional? Because he was asked questions, but he specifically brought up memories of the late Penn State coach. And is that, do you think, an opening salvo to maybe heal some wounds between parts of the fan base that feel like everything that went down was wrong? Am I reading too much into that?
I think probably reading too much. I didn't necessarily take that away from it. Look, I think that having an ability to not shy away from the toxicity of the name Joe Paterno that existed 10 years ago right or wrong, okay, and certainly in the minds of many, incorrectly, right? Like it should have never gotten to the point where everyone had to shy away about saying nice things about Joe Paterno. And let's be honest, we're forgetting in our collective consciousness the fact that a ton of people said very nice things about Joe Paterno after his passing, right?
Yeah.
Phil Knight among them, like many significant people, okay? But there is a feeling, certainly within Penn State, that over the last 10 years, people haven't been able to say it, right?
Yeah.
To put his image on the Beaver Stadium Jumbotron, to talk about him in real terms. And so, yes, that in itself for Pat Kraft of, hey, like, I'm not going to act like he didn't exist or that I didn't have this formative experience of him addressing the team. He talked, right? He had this experience where Indiana got stuck in State College during that one trip to Penn State. And Joe Paterno came and addressed the team at 6 a.m. the next morning. It was a good story. Like, and he talked about how significant that was for him. Do I see that as like, hey, this is an intentional way to bridge the gap and start to heal old wounds? No, not necessarily. But I do see it as, hey, like Pat Kraft has no reason to avoid or to shy away from, having this conversation and addressing Joe Paterno again in real terms. I mean, I do think that is a step in a good direction of, like, be honest, right? Like, be honest about how messy all of this was. It was tough, right? But also be honest in the sense of you can't act like he didn't exist. It's not a feasible thing moving forward at Penn State. And so I thought he handled it well, to be honest with you.
Maybe, and Dave, is it just I don't want to say a happy accident, but like a sign that Pat Kraft might be just one of the best, an example of why he's one of the best possible candidates, that he has these experiences with Penn State and that he's unafraid. He's not measuring his words, because I don't think he was in that situation where this is who he is, and who he is fits very well at Penn State. Is that an okay read of what we saw?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I mean, he was very real, right? That's what I thought outside of, like the concrete issues that were discussed. I left that feeling like this is a very passionate, real, emotional guy. And look, in college athletics, especially at that level where there is that much money being handled and that much politics taking place, I don't think realness is common. So if it's great that he's willing to talk about real issues and he's not going to pretend things didn't happen. So it's definitely, I don't know that definitely makes him like a successful athletic director. I don't know that means he's going to come in here and be awesome. But I do think it's a good start.
So the reason I'm driving at this is because being an athletic director is about forging relationships. I think he said that, or Neely Beneputi said that, is it's about forging relationships and getting things done through that element. And somebody who has that personality, mentioning the largest living alumni base, if you can't access all of that because of these issues, is that not a huge advantage where, there has been some political politeness previously, say that 5 times fast, when it comes to the situation? So I guess that's kind of my thought behind it, is intentional or not, it does seem like it is a huge benefit that Penn State can, in the era of NIL, where you are trying to get these things done, and you have to do something about Beaver Stadium, and you have to stay competitive, you need to get the donations in the door. And is that something, Nate, he can do, not just on a respectable level, but take Penn State to the heights of where it needs to be competitive when it comes to, you mentioned Phil Knight and Nike and Oregon, even Maryland with Under Armour, like these situations where you have these mega donors that can change Texas A&M forever. Penn State does not have any of those on its Rolodex that have been contributing. So are these things capable? Are they possible with Pat Kraft from a aggregate and from a large donor standpoint?
Yes. I mean, this is a very broad conversation, but the time that Sandy Barber came into the position versus the time now are radically different, right? In terms of the tenor of the public conversation. If you're Pat Kraft, you want and need and should be determined to have as broad and big of a tent as you possibly can have to invite anyone with any tangential relationship to Penn State back in, right? It does not matter where you stand, right? On so many things. It is very simply, welcome back. Like, come on back in, right? Clean slate, fresh start. And so I do think that there is an intentionality to setting that tone, right? Not of, hey, let's, like, first thing on the docket is to build a new stadium and to name it Paterno Field. Like, I don't think it's that, right? Because that's the extreme side of it, right? Like, that's the polar opposite. It's just a matter of you gotta set a tone of, look, like, this has been difficult, but most of the difficulty, the most challenging parts of it should be in the rearview mirror, right? Like, let get it together from a human side of things, like, invite other people back into the fold. And I think that is absolutely going to be one of right? Like, I mean, because it's not just athletics, it's the entirety of the institution to try to make amends and get things back, to where people are enthusiastic and passionate about Penn State.
Here's a question, and this is very off the beaten path, but also something I've been thinking about. We cover Penn State sports, we cover this stuff in depth. We know kind of the personality, the tapestry of Penn State fans and the story here. Is the same thing happening at Michigan State? Because, the Larry Nassar situation and that story is of the same magnitude, if not exponentially greater than what happened at Penn State. But I don't know if that's the same feeling amongst the fan base, or if this is something from the time and the way it was covered and reported to the, having Joe Paterno to put these things and attach them to. It just feels like this is either a unique situation or one that Penn State is kind of keeping around with these conversations or these feelings, these buried or these resentful feelings about how everything happened a decade ago. What do you think about the particular environment that exists, Dave? Do you think that this is common among universities that have this issue?
I mean, to be honest, I have no idea what's going on in Michigan State. I just don't, right? Like, but I would imagine that some of it exists, right? Because obviously that was a horrifying situation. But I mean, look, Nate and I, and this, we're so dialed into what's happening here that we're not, I guess, looking too hard at what's happening at Michigan State. If Nate wants to weigh in, feel free. But
I didn't give you a question. I gave you my opinion and then just threw it at you. I threw a dead fish in your lap is what I did. It's I guess that's just my thought. Is like, Penn State is not the only university to have a major scandal involving sexual assault or any of these things, and not to take those horrors and make them about the program. But there is this fallout from those things. And it seems like Penn State, their fallout has just continued to echo where some of the other ones did not. And Nate, I guess I'm fascinated as to the deconstruction of why that particular thing seems to exist here.
Yeah, I don't know that it does at this point. Like, okay. I mean, I get it. And kind of there's some, I don't know, like, and this is, I guess, something that has to be navigated by us in the media. We're really the eyes and the ears of the public. Like, we're just a reflection of the public in a lot of ways. And I don't know that the issue of, like, while it is something that is still discussed And yeah, there are some hard feelings attached to that within the fan base, but I don't know that it is. Actually, I do know it's not nearly the front and center topic at this point. It's just not. I mean, yes, there is a segment of the population and the fan base that still wants certain things to be amends to be made, but I don't think that it is like if you're a Penn State football fan, having lived through 2016, 17, 19, right, the success that the football program had, that's what you want.
Yeah.
like the overwhelming number of people, like it doesn't matter. Right. Like what happened 10 years ago. Yeah, there are things that people are still going to be upset about in the way that the university in particular handled that situation. But more important to really an overwhelming demographic of the Penn State fan at this point is simply, how do you win? Like win football games. How do you James Franklin's 10-year contract is a much bigger point of concern for Penn State fans on the whole now than a statue. It just is like that's the truth. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting here because I do think that some of the things that you see that happen in the public eye, right? I have no idea what the conversations are going to be between Pat Kraft and Terry Pegula, right?
Yeah.
Ira Lubert. Like any of the whales in Penn State's pond, I don't know how those conversations are going to be had and the tenor regarding Joe Paterno. But I think that the public stance, the public facing profile is going to be just if it comes up, not being afraid to talk about it.
Yeah.
Not being afraid to acknowledge that Joe Paterno was an influential person in the football realm at Penn State. Like and I think that it's a no-brainer. Like at this point, you can take those steps.
Yeah. So we spent a lot of time on this, but it's just because it's an interesting turning point that happened on Friday from a very public situation and one that we have not had in a while. But also when you talk about the fan base and getting everyone involved and all those things, these are the little sticking points along the road that feel like, are these things going to hold Penn State back from NIL discussions and monetary donations? And without knowing, you have to ask, you have to think about it. You have to bring these things up and discuss them in the light. Is there anything else from Nate from the press conference that I've missed that you think is important that we emphasize more than what we just rolled around in for a little bit?
Yeah. So one, and I just have to say this because he's never going to stop texting me. I have to give a public hat tip to a friend of mine who told me on March 21st that Pat Kraft would be the next athletic director at Penn State. So hat tip to a friend who saw the writing on the wall. The second thing, I just like the overall thing that I think is the most important is the thing that I said at the top, which is very simply, this guy is committed to winning. He is hyper competitive, and that can create some very interesting dynamics because I don't want to speak in so broad terms, but Penn State on the whole has this underlying, I don't know if reputation is the right word, but there is a comfort. It's a cozy blanket of what Penn State athletics is.
Traditional.
Everyone feels good. Everyone, right? Like, and you get in, you have time, no brash action, none of that, right?
Yeah.
That's what it has been. I don't know that that's what it will be under Pat Kraft. And so lighting fires under butts, right? Like, I think is a good way to put it, right? Like this aggressive mentality, which, to be honest with you, I think when you look at James Franklin and what his leadership at Penn State has tried to be, it aligns very closely with, look, we're going to push this ball forward. And if you're on board, we're going to expect of you to do everything within your power to move that ball forward.
Yeah.
And if not, that's okay. Maybe maybe that's not right for you, but you're not going to get in the way of the people who are now at the top, right? Like pushing that ball forward. So I do think that there could be, and I get the sense from Neely Bendapudi as well. Like it is some of the cultural comforts that have existed at Penn State could see themselves diminished, I think, over the next couple of years.
The BWI live show here on YouTube. Thanks to everybody who participated. Thanks to everybody in the comments section. We covered a lot of ground today, from big picture stuff to we even got our Sean Clifford quota in today. But one thing that we need to get to, we need to get to Dave Eckert and his big man update for Penn State basketball. What do you have as far as feelers out there, portal invites? Do you have a helicopter following Micah Shrewsbury? What do you got as far as what's going on with Penn State basketball and the transfer portal?
No, James Franklin declined to let me borrow his helicopter, which is very upsetting. No, I mean, there hasn't been a whole lot of movement, right? So actually, we had this question, T. Frank, on the Mailbag podcast last week. The May 1st transfer portal entry deadline does apply to basketball. So who's in there is who's in there, because today is May 2nd. But yeah, I mean, there hasn't really been a whole lot of concrete movement. The one guy who we know that they're chasing very intently is Davion Bradford from Kansas State, 7-footer, averaged 3.3 points last year, 7.7 the year before though. So, he was a decently rated recruit, but yeah, as far as like concrete, here's what's going on. There's not a ton to really talk about.
Well, we'll keep at it this summer. Dave is an excellent reporter. We got insiders everywhere. So the BWI live show, we'll keep you up to date on all that stuff. But that does it for today. Nate, you just always look like you're about to say something.
I know. Well, first of all, we have 2 minutes, so but I do have a little bit of perspective to add to Dave's there.
Sure.
The pool is shrinking, right? So what has happened on the quote unquote big man front is there are fewer options today for Penn State than there were on Saturday. And so I think, it's like we'll see. We'll see. He's right though. The Kansas State kid is front and center at the front of their recruiting imaginations. It's just a matter of, hey, waiting, right? Figuring that out. And then if not, go from there, right? Like you gotta turn your, because you got to do something. Somebody has to come in. So,
yeah,
that's it. I'll shut up. I'm done.
Large human, big human.
Any large humans with basketball. College eligibility. Yep. They're all invited to play basketball at Penn State.
Well,
please.
Just like all the people watching that may fit that profile, I have yet to be drafted. So another year gone.
10 and I don't know it.
I'm not talking about for basketball. I'm not talking about for basketball. We just got to. We spent 35 minutes talking about the NFL draft. Still haven't gotten drafted. The problem is I'm getting to the end of my NFL career. I'm gonna be 32 in August. So me and Adam Thielen share the same birthday. I'm worried about Adam. How many years does he have left? He's a receiver. We're both receivers. Like, can he keep up?
You're not feeling it anymore, T. Frank?
I don't know. I think he's still good. We still got time, Adam, is what I'm trying to say. That's it for the BWI live show. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. Coming up later, more draft stuff. We break down the draft with Greg Pickle, our other reporter who was discussing the draft over the weekend, give you more perspective on and get into the nitty-gritty on some of these picks we didn't get to here on the live show. And then the recruiting show coming up tomorrow for the BWI Daily Edition. I'm your host, Thomas Frank Carr. We'll talk to you then.